Hi again and welcome to the channel. Let's watch another cool episode of Harold Tribune World Youth Forum. What is that old forum? Well, you should watch this video showing above for that. In this episode, teenage foreign delegates are discuss about who's prejudiced and participated following students. Peter Goulden from England, Nils Harboe from Norway, Nalini Nail from India, Bizuayenu Agonafir from Ethiopia. As usual, presenter of the discussion is lovely Mrs. Helen Height-Waller. Let's see the video.
WCBS TV presents Young Worlds, a stimulating discussion of young ideas of world interest by teenage students from foreign countries, invited to live and study for 3 months in the United States by the New York Herald Tribune Youth Forum. Each student, while here, will live with 4 host families with teenage children and attend local public and private schools. Today's discussion will be between Miss Bizuayenu Agonafir of Ethiopia, Mr. John Goulden of the United Kingdom, Miss Nalini Nail of India, and Mr. Nils Harboe of Norway. And here is your moderator, Helen Height-Waller.
The discussion that's developing seems singularly appropriate to Brotherhood Week. The question is whether everybody or just some few people have prejudices. What do you say about that, Roger?
Well, I think all people have prejudices. Many people, they don't see their own prejudices, and they say they don't have them. But I think all people have them, even if they don't see them.
Well, I agree with him. I don't think there's anybody here who does not have any sort of prejudice, whether he is educated or not.
Yes, that's only partly true, though, because, first of all, what is a prejudice? It's a view based on lack of knowledge about something. Prejudgment, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, surely, a person who knows a lot about a subject can't be described as prejudiced, because he does know all about the subject.
Oh, but he doesn't know about every subject.
No, but about that particular subject, he can't be prejudiced about that individual subject.
Oh, yeah, he can't be prejudiced against that subject because he knows about it, but he may be prejudiced against other subjects, so we say that he has got prejudices too.
You think education is a good weapon against prejudice?
Oh, yes, I do.
Well, a slight difference here. You say, I gather, the educated man is the man free of prejudice.
No, less prone to prejudice.
Well, now, what are some of your own prejudices? Let's get down to brass tacks here. What are some of yours, Roger?
Well, I think when I came here to America, I think Americans have prejudices against Russians. Now, wait a minute. You were prejudiced against the Americans because the Americans were prejudiced against the Russians? Is that what you're saying? Yes, that's one thing. And I was also prejudiced against America before I came here. For instance, against American teenagers. I have never expected to find American teenagers working hard in school. They discuss the current events and they discuss political problems. They have classes where they discuss the problems of American democracy. Here in America, I had never expected to find that. I thought all American teenagers were lazy and did nothing and then go to movies and have parties.
Does that check with your experiences?
Well, I think it does, because I was slightly prejudiced against America before coming here. But I have a great prejudice against the British, all right.
But can you leave the British for just a minute? We'll come to that. I want to bring out some of these other prejudices on America and try to find out about them. What about your prejudices, Bizu?
Well, my prejudice on America was based on the racial segregation here, because I heard a lot about the segregation in the United States and about the way the Americans treated the Negroes. Well, after I came here and noticed that and noticed that there is not at least my segregation in the North, and asked the people here about it, they told me that it's just in the South and not in the North. But I think that they don't realize the fact that we, the people outside America, we think only the United States as a whole and not as a different parts. And we don't care whether it's in the South or it's in the North. We think only as the United States, and we say that there's segregation in the United States. Well, as a black girl, well, I'm a colored girl, and when I hear that the whites ill-treat the black people, I was really prejudiced against the Americans.
I agree with her too, because I always feel that America, being one of the leading powers and so well educated, they should have the segregation problem. And when I heard that I was coming here, I was very frightened as to just think what I'm going to meet over here and how I'm going to be treated over here.
Yes,
It was just something that
I agree that there was a time when both Britain and America had a tremendous moral lead in world affairs, especially America. After the War of Independence, America was regarded as the citadel of liberty, but I feel that if America is going to lead the world, she must get back to this more idealistic approach to liberty for all countries.
Well, now, let's go a little bit back to the question of prejudices. You've brought out two now. You say you were prejudiced against the Americans because you thought their teenagers didn't work hard enough, and you and Nalini say you were prejudiced because of the race, of the segregation in the United States. What about some of the differences between people and prejudices in your own country? What about India, for example, Nalini? What prejudices are at work there in your society?
Well, I exactly don't know some of the prejudice down in my country, but we have had the caste system for quite a long time, and there has been prejudices from the lower caste against the higher castes, because they think that they have not been given the same rights. But you don't find that so much now, because our government is doing a lot for the lower caste to come up, and you don't find that prejudice. And I don't think many of my people have any prejudice against any other nation, except in we don't like colonialism, and we don't believe in people coming forward and trying to put down a nation when they should be given their independence, when every man has the right to be free.
We must save this for a later program.
Come on, open season on the British now, John. It's all right.
Well, I know Britain is often regarded as a class society, but since we've been semi-socialized for perhaps nearly 10 years, I think there is much less class consciousness. Personally, I have a class feeling in that I oppose the idle rich still. I don't disapprove of all the aristocracy, because some of the aristocrats in England have used their wealth for philanthropic purposes, but, oh gosh, some of the aristocracy I still hold a grudge against.
Nalini, have you finished with Johnny, or do you want to talk a little bit more about... I'm interested in this prejudice as to its effect on Indian society today.
Well, I'd like to know why the British, they're not giving their independence to Kenya.
Well, this is a question, do you mean because of the British government is not giving independence?
That's right.
Well, first of all, the people in Kenya, the actual natives themselves, who form a vast majority, aren't economically capable of being independent. They're not politically ready for independence.
When are they going to be ready if you're not going to give them the rights now?
Well, we are giving it them gradually, and within less than 10 years, with capital development and political education, they will be ready for independence. But you've got to remember that there are 25,000 white settlers there who hold all the political and economic power at the moment. And these people are reactionaries. They are against any progress against any political power on the part of the natives.
But you mean to say the Parliament has no right on such people? They would listen to the government?
Well, it's the colonial office that has the power, but one can't just force the white settlers to hand their land over or give in their economic powers, because they have the vested interests in Kenya. If they were to leave Kenya, Kenya would no longer be economically viable.
Oh, yes, they can hold the land if they buy it, as you said. But why don't they give them the right to educate themselves? Why don't they give them the opportunity for education?
Well, they are. That is the point.
But I've heard that they send this, the people of Kenya to a barren land, and if they go to this barren land, they will just be interested in developing that instead of going for education. Why don't they let the people live among them? I mean, together with them. Why don't they let them intermingle with them? Why do they put a separation between the white and the black?
Well, the government doesn't impose this separation. It's the blacks and the whites that impose it on themselves. This is not an official policy like apartheid, imposed by the Colonial Office of Great Britain. It's just that the white people regard themselves as richer and having a different culture, and so they don't want to mix. They feel that if they did mix by intermarriage and social mixture, they would their own culture would be swamped by the numerical superiority of the colored people. Yes.
You mean to say the people in Kenya don't have a culture of their own?
Yes, that's the point. They have a culture of their own, and this culture should be kept independent. It shouldn't be westernized.
Well, then give them their independence.
When they're ready for it.
And when are they going to be ready for it?
In 10 years' time, when all the capital and economic development has been put in.
You mean you start giving them that in 10 years' time? You haven't started at all.
Well, they are starting now.
But how can they start it if they don't have contact with the white people there?
Well, they do have contact with the white people. This is a gradual process of development. First of all, the governor has a council of all whites. Then he has a council of half white, half black. Then they introduce an assembly, perhaps in about 5 years' time, of which half the people are elected and half the people are appointed by the governor, and the governor still has considerable powers of veto. But then they have a wholly elected assembly, and eventually the governor's powers diminish until the people are considered politically ripe for independence.
Well, the persons who are going to be members of this Congress are the ones who are educated.
Yes.
Well, if you don't give them education, how can they ever be in that Congress?
Well, so you do give them education. That is the solution.
But they don't, you see, you give them their education and they are living separately. They don't know what the whites are, how the whites act, and they won't have the same opinion as the whites then when they go to that Congress.
What is the point of bringing the blacks and the whites together if their educational
They will
standard is so much
understand each
different?
other. They will understand each other. They
will,
have the
not
same
if-
opinions.
Not if the one group is very well educated and the other group is illiterate. One must bring the blacks up to the standard of the white, not bring the whites down to the standard of the blacks.
Well, you can bring the blacks to the standard of the whites by intermingling them. Why can't you? Do you mean that if the whites get in contact with the black people, that they will just go lower instead of bringing up the black people?
Well, if they have universal education for everyone, what will happen is that either the standard of education will fall, as you admitted it would happen in India. You admitted that if everyone was given education, the standards would fall. It would be exactly as you did on that television program on education.
I didn't admit it. I didn't admit it. Did I admit that, Mrs. Waller?
I seem to remember that you did. Anyway, if this were to happen, the white settlers would send their children to Europe for education. You see, which would even lower the cultural standard of Kenya even further.
Yes, but you said that you are giving contact between a Westerner and a native. But isn't that a contact between a master and a slave, and not by equal rights?
Well, in what way are they slaves?
Well, then you are not giving them the independence, and all the people who are working down there are slaves of the Westerners, aren't they? You said they buy them.
Could you
all.
define this word slave? In what way are they slaves? I don't understand, Nalini.
Well, they work for them.
Well, does that make them slaves? Your father must have several people working for him, but they're not slaves, are they?
But then they are not. They might not be slaves, but this is a government from a foreign country.
It isn't government from a foreign country. It is at the moment, but gradually it is becoming self-government. But it must happen gradually. These people cannot be thrown straight from dependence on Britain to complete liberty. Look, in Ghana we put into practice this gradual process of liberty and government. And what happened in Ghana? They proved that they weren't ready for it. They now have to have a semi-dictatorship, and Nkrumah is given emergency powers.
Well, I think if you try, but you're not doing it at once. You're doing it so gradually.
Yes.
And it's now that every nation is wanting its independence. And I think if you do give them complete power if you do want that, you can give them independence.
Yes, but who is clamoring for independence? It's the intellectuals. Perhaps the top 1 or 2% who have been given a really good education, possibly in America or Europe. These people are ready for liberty and for independence, I admit. But what about the vast majority?
I'm sure they are, and they want the independence. But I think they just don't want to ask. They just don't dare to ask for it now.
Well, they do ask for
Johnny,
it continually, Nalini.
Roger's been giving me a look. I think he's wondering whether you, if you were an American, would maintain exactly this position. Do you see any, you've heard Johnny talking about criticizing America for the segregation policy here. Are you now making a defense of which position? Put yourself in the position of America and some of your comments about America.
Do you mean the American racial policy?
Well, I'm just wondering if there's any connection between the way one thinks about race problems in Kenya and how one thinks about race problems in the United States. Is there any?
Well, I don't know too much about race problems in Kenya. I know more about the race problems in United States. I think in Norway, the people there, we can't understand that you have race problems here. But I think we have got no problems like this ourselves, so it's very easy to talk about it. But if we had the problems, I think, I'm not quite sure that we would have had integration. Maybe
You don't have any race problems in Norway at all, Roger?
Well, we have the Lapps in the north, but I think now there is no problems about them. Not now, but there were before. They were not quite recognized as Norwegians, but they're very small, about 7,000 Lapps, and they live in the north for themselves.
Do they tend to stay together, or is there intermarriage? And
There is intermarriage, and the Lapps are fully recognized now, but not before. But now they are fully recognized.
You know, I think there's a tendency in America to compare the American race question with the question in, say, South Africa and Kenya, but these aren't really the same situations at all. Because in America, as the Negroes are educated, they will be absorbed into the Western society. Whereas in Kenya and South Africa, if these people were given independence just like that, the white people would be absorbed into society, and the white people are the people with the economic and political power. There is a big difference there, isn't there?
Well, you see, I don't exactly understand what you mean, but you see, you are separating the blacks and the whites there in Kenya, and you think that intermingling wouldn't help at all. But
Oh no, please let me make my position clear. I'm in favor of integration in Kenya.
Oh
but
yes.
If the white settlers there will not, and the black people don't want to themselves, one cannot force them.
Why
Well,
do you say the black people don't want to?
Do you think the prejudice is purely white? You don't think the black people have any prejudice against the whites?
But
You
how
yourself
come
have
they do?
prejudice against
They
the
do.
whites,
They
haven't
do.
you, Nalini?
Yes, I do.
Yes, you have.
but
I
how
do.
can they help being prejudiced if
That's right.
the white people are not treating them well?
Well, why are they being maltreated? They're being given education gradually. We aren't as rich a
But why
country as all
gradually?
that.
Why don't you give them education? You see, Ethiopia is an underdeveloped country like Kenya, but we have got our independence and we don't need any help from Britain, Great Britain or anywhere. We can help ourselves, and so can the Kenya.
But
the
you
people
have
from
always been
Kenya.
independent.
Oh yes,
You
we
haven't been a
also-
colony.
We are, well, if they give independence to Kenya too, I'm sure they can support themselves as we do.
Well, I can say that because we have been a colony, and after you giving us independence, we've been able to cope up all right. And
Yes,
I'm
how? By getting lots of Western capital, didn't you?
But we
5-year
have-
plans.
Yes, the 5-year plans have been based by us. We do get foreign help. But even then, we are coping up. I'm sure Kenya can go about with that. They can get foreign help too.
Yes, but all the power in India was not concentrated in the hands of the whites, all the economic power, as it is in Kenya. See, in India, the power has never really been concentrated in the hands of rich white capitalists.
Why?
Whereas it is at the moment in Kenya.
They
Why
wouldn't
is
dare
it?
to.
They wouldn't dare to, no.
Who wouldn't dare? You mean the white people?
The white people in India never had all that power, but they have in Kenya, and one can't just take it from them like that.
Well, you see, if you don't let the whites and the black people have the same opinion, and if you don't give them the same education together, they won't have the same opinion in the future too, and it will be very difficult for you to let the black people enter the Congress afterwards.
Yes, Bizu, I see your point, but since the war, we've given $2,000 billion to the colonies. Now, we are not a rich country. We do not give as much aid as America, but we give as much as we can. And the educational program is not perhaps as much as we would like to give them, but we do give them all we can in the way of education. Perhaps it's insufficient, but it's as much as we can. And it must be a gradual process. One can't just give people a high school education after they've been illiterate for thousands of years. Gradually build it up, yes, as they are doing in India. Aren't they?
Johnny, since there isn't a delegate from Kenya, it's a little difficult. I'd rather stick on things that we know, and I think you asked a fair question of Nalini that you didn't ask of Bizu. What prejudices do you have against whites? Or is it only the whites that are prejudiced against people of a darker skin?
Well, you see, Ethiopia has been defeated by the Italians about 17 years ago, and we have been very much, we had suffered a lot because of these white people, the Italians. And when the younger generations, we grow up, we ask our parents about that, and our parents, they tell us a lot about it because they just can't help, they just can't forget what has happened to them before. And we are a little prejudiced against the white people. And many foreigners who come from the outside world, they say that the Ethiopians have a feeling of hostility towards the white people. But I want them to understand that how can we help it? We have been suffering for 5 years because of these Italians, and we can't forget it in 17 years. But we are getting help from the United States and from other countries, and now we are having a friendly, we are feeling friendly towards the white people now.
But because the Italians occupied your country for 5 years, does that make you hate all white people just because the Italians were white?
But you see, now I know that there's a difference between all white people are not the same. But you see, most of the people in Ethiopia are not educated. They are illiterate, and they see only the appearance of the people, and they just don't know one has come from the United States and one has come from Italy. So they seem prejudiced against all white people.
It's the same with us, isn't it, Mrs. Wallen? We must admit that the white people regard most of the coloured people as just coloured people until they get educated.
It's complicated now with so many people moving around so much because, as I think we see in the forum group, there aren't just two colors. There are infinite gradations. Would you be able in the forum group to say who was black and who wasn't? Where do you draw the line?
There's a very wavy line. I wouldn't know which way to include them.
Almost impossible.
And besides, all the people are of equal intelligence. That's what impresses me so much. The fact that the white people are by no means dominant in the group. Everyone is probably...
On the contrary, I think.
Yes, I think they're probably more intelligent than the whites are. And so one can't draw a line according to intelligence, and the colours vary so much one can't draw a line according to colour. What is colour prejudice based on then?
Yes, when you take the whole world together and see all the gradations, it makes it different. But Bizu, I'm not finished with you yet. I want to really find out. Would you marry a white man?
Oh no, not me. I won't marry. You see, it's because many of the countries in the in Africa have been colonies, and we want our independence. Ethiopia has never been a colony before, and we are afraid that if the white people got the opportunity to get hold of Ethiopia, they may want to make Ethiopia also a colony. So we don't want to intermarry with the white people and make our population, most of our population, white.
Oh, can I go into this? You're afraid that the white people might colonize Ethiopia. Can you name one colony that the white nations have taken over since the war? Do you know, 21 countries have been granted independence since the war.
Oh yes, it's true, but you mustn't forget that most of the people are illiterate. They don't know what about this happened after the war or before the war.
You hold then that these people are wrong in thinking that.
Oh yes, they are. Most of the people in the capital and those who are educated don't think like that.
You must tell everyone when you get back.
Oh yes, they are beginning to learn now. You see, but you cannot teach, as you have said, all the people at once.
Yes,
it's a gradual process.
Wait, give Roger a chance.
Do you have any overclass in your countries? Any social differences between people?
Well, we can't help having different classes in underdeveloped countries. Some of the people are rich and some of the people are poor. So the rich people keep to themselves and the poor people keep to themselves. But when our country gets developed and most of the people have the same level at least, then there won't be any class distinction at all.
Do the rich people help the poor people in making the country more developed? I mean, is it a sort of communal effort?
Everybody tries.
Do the poor people have any chance to get education?
Oh yes, they do. Every education is free in Ethiopia, and most of the schools are governmental, and governmental schools give free education to everybody, even the university college. Well, there is no age limit. Education is not compulsory, but it's free. It's up to the parents to compel their children to go to the school.
But how is there so much illiteracy then, if education is free?
But you see, do you know when school was started in Ethiopia? The first school was started in 1905, and the number of schools began to increase only about 25 years ago.
So what was happening for the 3,000 years that Ethiopia was an independent I'm honestly asking for information.
Oh yes, I understand. Well, Ethiopia has never had any contact with the outside world before. It has been just an isolated country since the 8th century. Well, before that, during the BC, before Christ's time, Ethiopia was a very civilized country, even more civilized than the Greek people, they said. But after that, when the Muslims came and tried to invade Ethiopia, Ethiopia kept to her religion. She was a very devoted Christian country, and it became just like an island surrounded by Muslims.
I have misunderstood you then, Bizu, and I apologize. What you were saying was the first public school was in 1905.
Yeah.
Because obviously you had private education for a long time before that.
Yeah, the private education was only for those who want to enter into priesthood.
I see.
And most of the people are farmers, and farmers do not need much education, so they don't go to schools.
We've got just a little time left. I want to really come back to a question I asked before. What have been some of your experiences personally with the race problem in the United States? I think it would be interesting to all Americans to hear.
I heard a very interesting story about a man in New York who was saying to one of my friends, I've got two dislikes. I hate people who are prejudiced and I hate niggers. This, I think, is quite a rare attitude, but there is a certain feeling of superiority still. In all the white people seem to feel it, just greater or lesser extent.
No, but in the schools you've been in here in the New York area, what kind of experiences? Right?
Well, I had very great difficulties with finding a place to sit in the cafeteria in the school. Then I came to a bench, And there sat 2 Negro girls and 1 Negro boy, and the rest of the place was empty. So there I could sit down, but all other places were overcrowded. But there were no people, only 2 Negro girls and 1 Negro boy, and there I could sit down.
Well, no, but in one of my schools that I've been, that I've noticed that even there are prejudices, but it's more of a prejudice not against race, but against the girls going to college, the college prep kids, the vocational and the business kids. You find that the college prep kids have a very great superiority complex, and you find that the business and the vocational girls and boys have an inferiority complex, and they don't mix with them. This is a prejudice that I found in one of my schools.
Is that true?
Yes, it is true, and you find that most of the vocational kids never mix with the college prep kids. They're completely separate, and they're so inferior. They just wouldn't like to come up, and most of their school classes are right down in the basement. So they always remain there, and then they never mix with the college prep kids.
Yes, I agree with Nalini. As America seems to get more and more homogeneous grouping and more streaming, the people become more conscious of their intellectual superiority. It's just the same in England too. It's very
That's, of
bad.
course, the reason why we haven't had homogeneous grouping. We haven't wanted to let these class differences come into education.
Before coming here, I had always an idea that there was great dignity of labor. I mean, everybody was proud of what she was doing or what she was taking or he was taking. But here, a vocational or a business kid just feels so inferior to the college prep kid. And I can't understand why, because he has chosen his own business, and so why should he be sort of, he doesn't like to say that he's doing a certain business.
I hope what you're commenting on is the rather recent new interest in intellectualism in this country. I hope it's that, but I don't want to forget it. Bizu, what's been your experience personally in the schools here with segregation?
Well, I haven't seen much. I've seen most of the kids, talking to one another and all this. But most of the time, the Negroes keep to themselves and the whites keep to themselves.
This is not so in the school that I am now. I find that there's great intermingling between the Negroes and the whites. I've never seen such things before. You find that the way they're treated, it's exactly like all of them are just one group of people. I haven't found 2 racial groups at all in this school.
No,
it's just something lovely.
There was a big sort of statewide discussion in New York City, and there was a school which was predominantly white, and yet the girl who was chosen to give a speech of welcome to Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt was a colored girl. And she was very intelligent. And in the school I'm staying at the moment, they had a very exciting basketball game in which the hero of the whole match was a colored boy. And they said he was the only person in the school that everyone knew his name. He was very popular, and there doesn't seem to be any distinction at all.
I'm so glad to end on that note, because after all, perhaps the possibility of brotherhood isn't quite so far away as we may have thought it was. If you've had experiences like that in our schools, all I can say is I couldn't be happier. Until next week, then.
Oh, that's it.
Can I borrow some of your water?
Sure.
Young Worlds has been produced by WCBS TV with the New York Herald Tribune Youth Forum.
I wasn't surprised on that.
No, we're still on camera, but no one.
This is funny.
Travel arrangements for our guests were made by Pan American World Airways and Trans World Airlines.
We must have a program on conformity.
Yeah.
I had a French 19-year-old with us this summer, and we went to a restaurant where Ted couldn't get any beer, and so we sent this 19-year-old who's been drinking, since he was a child, drinking wine. And he came back, he was absolutely furious. That was his prejudice against America.
This has been a presentation of the WCBS TV Public Affairs Department.
In this group of kids, the vocationals, they call the Rockies. They drink beer.